I lost my $15 million company, my house, and my reputation in 1 week, thanks to my own brother. But moving to a town of 800 people taught me something he'll never understand. What I discovered in that small mountain town wasn't just a new life, it was the life I was always meant to live. And when David finally tracked me down 6 months later, his face went white when he saw what I'd become. My name is Marcus Bennett, and I'm standing on the porch of my cabin in Cedar Falls, Montana, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. 6 months ago, I was worth $15 million, living in a mansion, running the construction empire I'd built from nothing. Today, I'm washing dishes at Elena's Diner for $12 an hour, and I've never been happier in my life. But the journey to this moment nearly destroyed me. The story begins 25 years ago when my younger brother David and I decided to turn our father's failing hardware store into something bigger. I had the vision and construction skills. David had a business degree and handled the books. Bennett Brothers Construction started with a single pickup truck and a shared dream. I remember those early days clearly, working 18-hour shifts, sleeping in the truck between jobs, splitting gas station sandwiches because we couldn't afford 2 meals. David would calculate our expenses on napkins, while I sketched building plans on the back of lumber receipts. We were broke, exhausted, and absolutely determined to succeed. "We're going to build something Dad would be proud of," David said one night as we sat in our tiny office above the hardware store. "Something that lasts." And we did. By our 10th year, Bennett Brothers was handling major commercial projects across 3 states. By year 15, we were bidding on government contracts worth millions. My innovative construction techniques had earned us a reputation for completing impossible projects on time and under budget. The company's crown jewel was the Morrison Medical Complex, a $40 million project that I designed to withstand earthquakes while maximizing natural light in patient rooms. The building won architectural awards and put Bennett Brothers on the national map. David managed to secure the financing that made it possible, working his connections in the banking world to structure a deal that kept our risk minimal. I should have paid more attention to those connections. By year 20, we employed over 200 people. I focused on the creative and operational aspects, designing projects, managing crews, ensuring quality. David handled everything else: contracts, finances, client relations, legal matters. It was a perfect partnership, or so I believed. The first crack in that partnership appeared 3 years ago, though I didn't recognize it at the time. David started pushing for expansion into commercial real estate development, arguing we should leverage our construction expertise to become property owners, not just builders. "We're leaving money on the table," David argued during one of our weekly strategy meetings. "We build these shopping centers and office complexes, then hand them over to developers who make the real profits. We should be those developers." I was hesitant. Construction was what we knew, what we were good at. Real estate development was different, riskier, requiring larger capital investments and longer-term thinking. But David was persuasive, presenting spreadsheets and projections that showed potential profits that dwarfed our construction income. "Trust me, Marcus," David said with that confident smile that had convinced clients to sign million-dollar contracts. "I've run the numbers. This is our next evolution." Against my better judgment, I agreed to a trial run. We formed Bennett Development as a subsidiary, with David taking the lead role. The first project was a small strip mall outside Denver. Low risk, David assured me, with pre-committed tenants and guaranteed returns. The strip mall was completed on schedule and found tenants quickly. David was vindicated, and I admitted my brother had been right. We expanded into larger developments, office buildings, apartment complexes, mixed-use properties. Each project seemed more successful than the last, and our company valuation soared. I was proud of what we'd built together. The business employed families, contributed to communities, created something lasting. I'd started dating again after my divorce 5 years earlier, thinking about slowing down slightly, maybe taking actual vacations. Life was good. Then came February 14th of this year, a date I'll remember for reasons having nothing to do with Valentine's Day. I was working late, reviewing plans for a new hospital project, when the crushing pain hit my chest. The heart attack struck without warning, dropping me to my knees in my office. David found me 20 minutes later and rode with me in the ambulance, holding my hand and promising everything would be okay. "Don't worry about the business," David said as I was wheeled into surgery. "I'll handle everything until you're back on your feet. Just focus on getting better." I spent 2 weeks in the hospital, followed by another month of strict rest at home. David visited daily, updating me on projects and decisions, assuring me that everything was under control. I was grateful to have someone I trusted completely handling things during my recovery. I should have been suspicious when David started suggesting I take even more time off. "You're pushing too hard too fast," David would say whenever I mentioned returning to work. "The doctor said you need to avoid stress. Let me handle things for another month while you really recover." My cardiologist agreed that reducing stress was crucial for my long-term health. My ex-wife, Jennifer, called to express concern and echo David's advice about taking time to heal properly. Even my daughter, Kelly, away at college, urged me to prioritize my health over work. So I listened. I spent my days reading, taking walks, attending cardiac rehabilitation sessions. I felt stronger than I had in years, both physically and mentally. The heart attack had been a wake-up call about what really mattered in life. That's why I was completely unprepared when I finally returned to the office on April 15th.
The first thing I noticed was that my key card didn't work. I stood at the back entrance of Bennett Brothers Construction, sliding my card repeatedly through the reader that had recognized me for 25 years. Nothing. I tried the front entrance with the same result. Assuming it was a technical glitch, I called David from the parking lot. His secretary, Patricia, answered with an odd hesitation in her voice. "Mr. Bennett," she said carefully, "Mr. David is in a meeting. Can I take a message?" "Patricia, it's Marcus. I'm downstairs and my keycard isn't working. Can you buzz me up?" A long pause. I'll let Mr. David know you're here." I waited in the lobby, increasingly puzzled by the strange atmosphere. Employees I'd known for years avoided eye contact, busying themselves with paperwork or suddenly urgent phone calls. The receptionist, Maria, wouldn't meet my gaze. When David finally appeared, he wasn't alone. 2 security guards flanked him, along with a man I didn't recognize. Expensive suit, briefcase, the unmistakable bearing of a lawyer. "Marcus," David said, his voice carefully neutral. "We need to talk. Conference room 3. The next 10 minutes destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. The lawyer, introduced as Robert Chen from Whitmore & Associates, presented me with a stack of documents. As I read through them, I felt the world tilting off its axis. According to the papers, Marcus Bennett was no longer a partner in Bennett Brothers Construction. During my recovery, David had exercised a clause buried deep in our partnership agreement, a clause I didn't remember signing. The medical leave provision allowed the healthy partner to assume full control if the other was deemed medically unfit to continue in their role. "This is insane," I said, looking up from the documents. "David, what the hell is this?" My brother's expression was sympathetic but firm. "Marcus, you had a major heart attack. Your doctor says stress could kill you. I'm protecting you from yourself." "By stealing my company?" By ensuring you don't work yourself to death, David replied. The business will continue to support you through the Medical Transition Fund. You'll receive payments equivalent to your salary for the next 5 years with full health benefits. You just can't be involved in day-to-day operations. I studied the documents more carefully, my business mind cutting through the emotional shock. The Medical Transition Fund David mentioned was real, but it was a fraction of what my ownership stake was worth. 5 years of salary payments versus decades of building equity? It wasn't even close to fair compensation. "Where's my lawyer?" I asked. "I want James Morrison to review these documents." Another uncomfortable pause. "James has been retained by the company," the lawyer said smoothly. "Conflict of interest prevents him from representing you in this matter." I felt increasingly trapped. James Morrison had been our corporate attorney for 15 years, handling everything from contracts to legal compliance. Of course, David would have secured his loyalty first. "This medical leave provision," I pointed to the relevant clause. "I don't remember agreeing to this." "It was part of the partnership restructuring we did 3 years ago when we formed Bennett Development. You signed all the documents at the same time." I had a vague memory of that day, stacks of papers related to the new development subsidiary, David explaining that most were standard legal language required for the expansion. I'd trusted my brother and signed where indicated without reading every page in detail. Now that trust was being used against me. "I want copies of everything," I said finally. "I need time to review this with my own attorney." "Of course," the lawyer said, sliding a USB drive across the table. "Everything's on here. You have 30 days to respond if you wish to contest any provisions." As I stood to leave, David touched my arm. "Marcus, I know this seems harsh, but I'm trying to save your life. The stress of running this business nearly killed you. Let me carry that burden now." I looked into David's eyes, searching for the David I'd shared dreams with, built an empire with, trusted completely. What I saw instead was a stranger wearing my brother's face. "Save my life?" I repeated quietly. "David, you just stole my life." Walking out of the building that bore my name for the last time, I felt numb rather than angry. The security guards escorted me to my car, ensuring I didn't stop to talk to any employees. Through the office windows, I could see people watching, some with sympathy, others with curiosity. The drive home was a blur. I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes before going inside my house, a house that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else's life. The full scope of my situation became clear over the next week as I dove into the legal documents and started making phone calls. The partnership restructuring David had mentioned wasn't just about the medical leave provision. It had transferred significant control of our assets to Bennett Development, the subsidiary David now ran alone. My house, which I'd believed was owned free and clear, was actually collateral for development loans David had secured. The classic car collection I'd spent years assembling was registered under the company name for tax purposes. Even my personal investment accounts had been structured as company assets to maximize our corporate tax advantages. David was methodical and thorough. Every asset that mattered to me was tied up in legal structures that gave David control. The 30-day response period wasn't enough time to unravel 25 years of intertwined finances, especially with Bennett Brothers attorneys working against me. I hired Rebecca Steinberg, a lawyer specializing in partnership disputes, but she was candid about my prospects. "Your brother planned this very carefully," she said after reviewing the documents. "Every document is legal, every procedure was followed correctly. Challenging this will take years and cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees. Even then, success isn't guaranteed." "So he just gets to steal everything we built together?" "From a legal standpoint, he didn't steal anything. He exercised rights granted to him in contracts you signed. The question is whether those contracts were obtained through fraud or misrepresentation, and that's extremely difficult to prove." I leaned back in Rebecca's office chair, feeling defeated. What would you do? Honestly, if I were you, I'd take the 5-year payout and move on. You're 52, healthy, despite the heart attack, and obviously capable of building something new. Fighting this could consume the rest of your life and bankrupt you in the process. That night, I sat in my house, soon to be David's house, and tried to make sense of what had happened. The brother I'd trusted with everything had been planning this betrayal for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. The heart attack hadn't created this situation. It had simply provided the excuse David needed to execute a plan that was already in place. The next few weeks brought a parade of humiliations. Old friends and business associates started avoiding my calls or offering awkward condolences that made it clear they'd already chosen sides. David was telling people that my health issues had affected my judgment, that the transition was necessary for everyone's protection. The construction community was small and gossip traveled fast. Within a month, my reputation as a reliable partner was destroyed. No one wanted to risk working with someone who might be unstable, someone whose own brother had found it necessary to remove them from their company. The final blow came when Jennifer, my ex-wife, called to say she supported David's decision. "I was married to you for 12 years, Marcus. I saw how the stress was killing you. Maybe this is a blessing in disguise." Even my daughter Kelly seemed to agree with David's narrative. During our weekly phone call, she gently suggested that maybe it was time for me to retire, to focus on my health and happiness instead of work. I realized that David hadn't just stolen my company. He'd stolen my identity, my relationships, my entire support system. Everyone who mattered in my life had been convinced that David was the responsible brother, protecting me from myself. By the end of May, I had lost everything. The house was gone, along with the cars and investments. The 5-year payout David had promised was tied up in legal challenges that could take years to resolve. Rebecca advised me to accept a lump sum settlement of $200,000, barely enough to start over, but guaranteed money I could access immediately. I took the settlement and found myself facing a question I hadn't confronted since I was 25. What now? The answer came from an unexpected source. Tommy Sullivan, an old friend from high school, called out of the blue. Tommy had been following the situation through mutual acquaintances and made a simple offer. "Come stay with me for a while. I'm sheriff in a little town called Cedar Falls, Montana. Population 800, more cows than people, but it's peaceful. You can figure out your next move without all the noise." I had nothing left to lose, so I accepted. I packed my remaining belongings into my pickup truck, the only vehicle David hadn't found a way to claim, and drove west toward mountains I'd never seen before.
The drive to Cedar Falls took 14 hours, but I drove straight through, wanting to put as much distance as possible between myself and my old life. I arrived at sunset, when the mountains turned purple and the sky blazed orange and pink. Tommy lived in a modest house on the outskirts of town, with a view of the valley that stretched to the horizon. He greeted me with a bear hug and a cold beer, asking no questions about what had happened. "House rules are simple," Tommy said as he showed me to the spare room. "No talking about the past unless you want to, no timeline for leaving, and you help with cooking because I'm terrible at it." For the first week, I barely left the house. I slept 14 hours a day, my body and mind recovering from months of stress and betrayal. Tommy went to work each morning and came home each evening without asking how I'd spent my day. The healing began slowly. I started taking walks around the small town, discovering a place where no one knew my story or cared about my failures. The diner on Main Street served coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The hardware store carried tools that looked like they'd been there since the 1950s. People nodded politely but didn't pry. It was at the diner that I first met Elena Rodriguez. Elena owned the place, a cheerful woman in her late 30s who treated everyone like family. She had an easy laugh and kind eyes, and she made the best pancakes I had ever tasted. More importantly, She offered me something I hadn't expected to find: purpose. "You look like someone who knows how to work," Elena said one morning after I'd been coming in for coffee for 2 weeks. "I need help fixing the kitchen exhaust fan, and the local handyman is backed up for a month. You interested in earning $20? I hadn't worked with my hands in years, but muscle memory kicked in as soon as I started examining the fan. The problem was simple: a worn belt and some loose connections, but Elena watched me work with obvious appreciation. "You're hired," she announced when I finished. "I've got a list of repairs as long as my arm, and you actually know what you're doing." Working for Elena felt different from anything I'd done in decades. There was no profit margin to worry about, no client expectations to manage, no brother to second-guess my decisions. Just broken things that needed fixing, and an appreciative boss who paid in cash and free meals. The work was simple but satisfying. I repaired leaky faucets, fixed wobbly tables, installed new lighting fixtures. My hands remembered skills I'd developed as a young man learning construction from the ground up. Each small repair completed felt like a victory. "You know," Elena said one afternoon as I finished replacing a broken freezer compressor, "I've been thinking about expanding. The old bank building next door has been empty for 5 years. Town could use a proper restaurant, not just a diner." I found myself getting excited about the possibility in ways I hadn't since the early days of Bennett Brothers. "What's your vision for the space?" Elena's eyes lit up as she described her ideas: a restaurant that celebrated the local ranching culture, featuring beef from area farms and creating a gathering place for the community. I found myself sketching plans on napkins, suggesting ways to open up the space and create flow between the dining areas. "This is amazing," Elena said, studying my drawings. "You really know what you're doing. Have you ever thought about going into business for yourself?" I laughed, but not bitterly. "I tried that once. Didn't work out so well." "Maybe you were just in the wrong place with the wrong people," Elena suggested. "Sometimes starting over means finding where you actually belong." That conversation planted a seed that grew over the following weeks. I began noticing things about Cedar Falls that my businessman's eye couldn't ignore. The town was slowly dying as young people left for opportunities in bigger cities. The buildings along Main Street needed significant repairs that the aging population couldn't afford. There was potential here, but it would take someone with vision and construction expertise to unlock it. More importantly, I was beginning to understand what Elena meant about finding where I belonged. In my old life, I was successful but constantly stressed, wealthy but somehow empty. Here in Cedar Falls, washing dishes for $12 an hour, I felt more like myself than I had in years. The transformation wasn't just internal. I noticed that my reflection looked different, more relaxed, less haunted. The permanent tension I'd carried in my shoulders was gone. I was sleeping better, eating better, even laughing more than I had in years. Tommy noticed the change too. "You look like a different person," he said one evening as we sat on his porch watching the sunset. "I feel different," I admitted. In my old life, I was always waiting for the next crisis, the next problem to solve. Here, problems are smaller, fixable, and when you fix them, they stay fixed. "What are you going to do long term? Not that you're not welcome to stay as long as you want, but I can see you're thinking about something." I was thinking about something. Elena's restaurant idea had evolved in my mind into something bigger, a vision for revitalizing Cedar Falls without destroying what made it special. Small projects that would create jobs, attract young families, preserve the town's character while giving it a sustainable future. "I'm thinking about putting down roots," I said finally. "For the first time in my life, I want to build something that's not about profit or growth or impressing anyone, just something good." That night, I called Rebecca Steinberg to ask about incorporating a new business in Montana. She was surprised to hear from me, and even more surprised when I told her about my plans. "You're sure about this? Starting over at 52 with limited capital is risky." "Everything worth doing is risky, but this feels right in a way nothing has for years."
3 months later, Cedar Falls Construction was officially incorporated. My first client was Elena, and together we transformed the old bank building into the Cattleman's Table, a restaurant that celebrated local ranching heritage while providing a gathering place for the community. The project took 6 weeks and came in under budget. More importantly, it generated enthusiasm among the townspeople who had watched their community slowly decline for years. Suddenly, there was hope that Cedar Falls could have a future. My second project was renovating the old movie theater for the city council. They couldn't afford much, but I worked at cost because I understood what the theater meant to the community. When it reopened with the showing of The Magnificent Seven, the whole town showed up. Word spread gradually. Other small towns in the valley heard about the work I was doing and started calling. I kept my project small and my prices fair, hiring locally whenever possible and training young people in construction skills they couldn't learn anywhere else in the region. By Christmas, Cedar Falls Construction employed 8 people and had a waiting list of projects. I was making less money than I ever had as an adult, but I'd never felt richer. The real test came in January when Rachel Torres arrived in town. Rachel was a lawyer from Billings who had grown up in Cedar Falls before leaving for college and career opportunities in the city. She'd come back to settle her grandmother's estate and ended up staying when she saw what was happening in her hometown. "I heard about the work you're doing," she said when she introduced herself at Elena's diner. "Mind if I ask you about your business model?" Rachel was smart, direct, and beautiful in a way that didn't depend on makeup or expensive clothes. She asked tough questions about my plans for growth, sustainability, and long-term economic impact. I found myself explaining my vision more clearly than I ever had before. "You're thinking like a community developer, not just a contractor," she observed. "That's rare." "I'm thinking like someone who wants to belong somewhere. That's even rarer." Rachel became a regular presence around my projects, officially helping with legal and permitting issues, unofficially becoming someone I looked forward to seeing every day. She understood what I was trying to accomplish in ways that went beyond business strategy. "You know what I find most interesting about what you're doing?" she asked one evening as we reviewed plans for a housing project that would provide affordable homes for young families. "What's that?" "You're not trying to get rich. You're not trying to grow as fast as possible. You're not trying to prove anything to anyone. You're just trying to do good work with good people in a place you care about." She was right. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't measuring success by profit margins or company valuation. Success was measured by whether my work made Cedar Falls a better place to live, whether the young families I built homes for could afford them, whether the businesses I renovated thrived and created jobs. It was a different kind of success, but it was more satisfying than anything I had achieved with Bennett Brothers. That's where things stood when David finally tracked me down.
I was working on the roof of the community center when I saw a black Escalade with Colorado plates pull up. I knew who it was before David stepped out of the driver's seat. He looked older, grayer, and somehow smaller than I remembered. I climbed down from the roof and walked over to meet him. Elena, Rachel, and Tommy had all noticed the expensive SUV and were watching from various vantage points around town. In a place like Cedar Falls, strangers stood out. "Hello, Marcus," David said, extending his hand. I didn't take it. "David, how'd you find me?" "Private investigator. I've been looking for you for months." He glanced around at the small town, the mountains, the simple buildings. "This is where you ended up?" "This is where I landed. What do you want?" David's expression was carefully neutral, the same face he'd worn when he stole my company. "I want to talk. Can we go somewhere private?" I gestured toward the park across the street. We walked over and sat on opposite ends of a picnic table, the silence stretching between us like a canyon. "You look good," David said. "Healthy. Happy." "I am. I was worried about you. After you left Colorado so suddenly, I thought I was concerned about your mental state." I laughed, but not with humor. "My mental state? That's rich coming from you." David's jaw tightened. "Marcus, I know you're angry about how things ended, but I did what I thought was best for everyone. Your health, the company, our employees. Stop. I held up my hand. Just stop. We both know what you did and why you did it. The question is what you want now. David looked around again, taking in the modest buildings, the quiet streets, the lack of obvious wealth or ambition. I want you to come back. That wasn't what I had expected to hear. Come back to what? To the company, Colorado, your old life. David leaned forward, his voice taking on the persuasive tone I remembered from 1,000 business meetings. I've been running Bennett Brothers for 8 months now, and it's not the same without you. We're profitable, but we're not innovating. We're completing projects, but we're not creating anything special. I studied my brother's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. What I saw instead was something I'd never seen from David before: uncertainty. What exactly are you offering? I asked. Full partnership restoration. I'll return your ownership stake, your equity, everything. We go back to the way things were before. Before you stole my company? Before you almost died from stress. David, I thought I was saving your life. Maybe I went about it the wrong way, but my intentions were good. I stood up from the picnic table and walked to the edge of the park. In the distance, I could see Elena serving lunch to a table of ranchers, Rachel reviewing building plans with the mayor, Tommy helping an elderly woman with her groceries. This was my life now. These were my people. No, I said, turning back to David. No what? No to all of it. I'm not coming back. David's composure cracked slightly. Marcus, be reasonable. You're washing dishes in a diner and doing handyman work in a town nobody's ever heard of. I'm offering you back your empire. You're offering me back my prison, I corrected. David, for 25 years, I built Bennett Brothers thinking it was what I wanted. It wasn't. It was what I thought I was supposed to want. You're making a mistake, David said, his voice hardening. Marcus, this place, this life, it's not real. It's not sustainable. What happens when you get bored, when you want more? I want more, I agreed. More time with people I care about. More work that matters. More days when I go to bed satisfied instead of stressed. More mornings when I wake up excited instead of anxious. David stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. You're talking about $12 an hour and fixing ceiling fans? I'm talking about building something that matters. David, look around. This town was dying when I got here. Now there are new businesses, young families moving in, hope where there wasn't any before. That's worth more than all the profit margins in the world. You've lost your mind, David said flatly. Maybe or maybe I finally found it. We stared at each other across 25 years of shared history and a gulf that had become unbridgeable. David represented everything I'd been: ambitious, driven, never satisfied, always reaching for more. I represented everything I'd become: content, purposeful, grateful for what I had. I'm not giving up on you, David said as he turned to leave. This phase will pass, and when it does, the offer stands. I watched him drive away in his expensive SUV, kicking up dust on the gravel road. Elena appeared beside me a few minutes later, offering a cup of coffee. Old friend? She asked. Old life, I replied. That evening, Rachel, Tommy, Elena, and I sat on Tommy's porch talking about David's visit. They were curious but not judgmental, supportive but not possessive. Do you ever miss it? Rachel asked. The money, the success, the recognition. I thought about her question seriously. I miss the feeling of building something important, but I have that here too, just on a different scale. I miss having resources to tackle big problems, but the problems here are smaller and more solvable. What about the recognition? Tommy asked. I get recognized here every day. Mrs. Patterson thanks me every time she sees me because I fixed her front steps. The kids at the school wave when they see my truck because I built their new playground equipment. That's worth more than any magazine article or industry award. Rachel reached over and took my hand. "You know what I think?" she said. "I think your brother did you a favor. He took away the life you thought you wanted and forced you to discover the life you actually needed." She was right. Losing everything had been the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because the loss itself was good, but because it had stripped away everything that wasn't essential and left me free to build something authentic. 3 months later, Rachel and I were married in a small ceremony at the cattleman's table, with Elena catering and Tommy officiating in his capacity as a justice of the peace. Half the town showed up, turning it into the kind of celebration Cedar Falls hadn't seen in years. My daughter Kelly flew in from college, and I was nervous about her meeting Rachel and seeing my new life. But Kelly surprised me. "Dad, I haven't seen you this happy since I was little, before the business got so big and complicated. You seem like yourself again." A year later, Cedar Falls Construction had grown to 20 employees and was working on projects throughout the valley. We'd built a reputation for quality work at fair prices, but more importantly, we'd built a reputation for caring about communities and not just profits. Rachel opened a law practice specializing in small business and municipal law, becoming the legal backbone for several small towns that couldn't afford big city attorneys. We bought a house on the edge of town with a view of the mountains and started talking about kids. I learned that David had expanded Bennett Brothers into new markets, acquiring smaller construction companies and pursuing larger government contracts. According to industry publications I occasionally read, the company was more profitable than ever. But when I looked at photos of their recent projects, I saw impressive buildings with no soul. Efficient construction with no heart. David never called or visited again, though I heard through mutual acquaintances that he remained convinced I'd eventually come to my senses and return to Colorado. He couldn't understand that I already had come to my senses. That's why I was staying in Montana. 2 years after losing everything, I was sitting in the same spot where I'd started this story, on the porch of my cabin in Cedar Falls, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. But now it was our cabin, mine and Rachel's, and she was beside me with her coffee and the newspaper. "Busy day ahead?" she asked. I checked my mental schedule. A meeting with the mayor about the new fire station project, lunch with potential investors in the community development fund we were establishing, an afternoon working on the house Tommy was building for his retirement. Busy, I agreed, but good busy. Rachel smiled and squeezed my hand. That's the best kind. She was right. I'd learned the difference between being busy building something meaningful and being busy chasing something that would never satisfy. David had taken away my company, my house, my reputation, my old life. In return, he'd given me the chance to discover who I really was and what I actually wanted. The brother who stole everything had, without meaning to, given me everything I'd been looking for all along. I'd found my home, my people, and my purpose in a town of 800 people who valued character over capital, relationships over returns, and community over competition. David would never understand that, which is why he would never be truly happy despite all his success. But I understood it perfectly. And every morning when I woke up in this place I'd chosen, surrounded by people I loved and meaningful work I was proud of, I felt grateful for the brother who'd taught me the difference between having everything and having enough. Some lessons are expensive, but the ones that change your life are always worth the price.